محافظين. من يوم ما توحدت أرضنا وأبوابنا مفتوحة لكل البشر، محافظين على التراث والكنوز وعلى الكلمة وحروفنا المتناغمة في كل سطر، وعلى النقوش اللي لقينا فيها طيب الأثر، وعلى الفن اللي تخطى الحدود وقرب بين الشعوب. محافظين على ريحة القهوة والهيل وأرحب تراحيب المطر، وعلى المحبة اللي طالت كل البشر والعطاء اللي امتد مثل ظل الشجر. محافظين وبسواعدنا نتحدى الصخر، نحفر طريقنا مجد وكرامة وعز وفخر. ما تغيرنا جيل ورا جيل، حب الوطن فينا فاض وانهمر، وتحت كل سماء وفوق كل أرض محافظين.
Hello all, welcome to Coffee with the Learning Leaders. Coffee with the Learning Leaders is a monthly discussion session. Every month it happens within a specific topic, and we reach out to leaders within this field to discuss certain questions, certain concerns within this topic. The focus of Coffee with the Learning Leaders is informal. So we look at common topics from a different angle, from the informal angle. So today I'm here with you. I'll be moderating this session. My name is Mahal Abbad. I am part of the Knowledge and Learning Unit in Ithra, King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture. And with us, we have Dr. April and Dr. Ithra. We'll start with Dr. April, if you can introduce yourself.
Yes, good evening. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm Dr. April Edmondson. I am a nationally certified school psychologist originally from the United States. I have a doctorate in school psychology and a certification through the American Board of School Neuropsychology. I've worked as a school psychologist for the past 13 years in the United States, in Thailand, and now working here in Saudi Arabia. I think one of the best parts of my job as a school psychologist is getting to work directly in the schools. And when I work directly in the schools, I'm able to work individually with students, not just on mental health concerns, but also any learning concerns that might arise. So I conduct evaluations and assessments with students, and then work with the teachers and the administrators in order to identify interventions or supports that the student may need within the school system. I also get to collaborate with parents and community mental health supports in order to wrap around and provide the best services for children. In the area of giftedness, this is an area that I'm really passionate about, and conduct evaluations to determine giftedness, as well as work with school systems to put policies in place and structures in place to ensure that we're meeting all of our learners. Perhaps the most difficult job I have, though, is as a wife and mother. I'm a mom of two really sweet boys that are 3 and 6 years old. They keep me on my toes, but it's also the most rewarding thing that I get to do. And it certainly has had a significant impact on my profession as a school psychologist.
Thank you, Dr. April. Dr. Ithra.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As my colleague, Dr. April stated, Just to talk about a little bit of myself, my journey with education started over 2 decades ago. I hope that won't give up my age. I have a double bachelor's degree in child health and education, as well as teaching. Then I went on doing my master's degree in special education and a doctorate degree in gifted and talented individuals, their education, their needs, and how do we meet them. Over the past 2 decades, I was very blessed and lucky enough to have worked with different children on different parts of the world, majorly in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and now in Bahrain. I also was very lucky to be able to work with children and their parents in United States as well as in South Korea. So I have different experiences with different age groups. We start with K to 12, includes college students as well as adults, the leaders in schools, teachers. As Dr. April said, about and above all of this educational and field background, I guess I am the most happiest and cheerful about being a mother for a teenager who happens to be very creative himself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ithra. Okay, so the topic that we'll be focusing on this session is gifted education. As I stated earlier, we're not going to be looking at it from a formal setting. We're going to be tangling this topic from an informal setting. So whether it's a gifted child or a gifted individual, a gifted adult, how do they operate in that formal setting, and how do we bring them out of it? What the current system is and how can we change it, what's good about it and what's not. So first, let's start with defining giftedness. What is it, and what's the difference between a gifted individual, a talented individual, and a creative individual or child? Dr. April, we can start with you.
Well, it's interesting because giftedness, there's not an agreed upon definition, I guess, across the world of what giftedness is, because of lots of different things: diversity, resources to support gifted students, policies and procedures that are in place in different places. But what I would say that giftedness is just the possession of special abilities. And in the educational setting, we typically hang our hats on, I guess, intellectual quotient or IQ and high achievement. When we look at giftedness in this way, and we think of the average IQ is 100 with the standard deviation of 15. So most people in the world fall in that range between 85 and 115. So giftedness is typically 2 full standard deviations above that. So a lot of times when we think of giftedness intellectually is a score of 130 or above, give or take. So in some instances, it's like 125. We also sometimes consider mild giftedness in that range of an IQ score of 115 to 130. Again, this is just one dimension to identify or a student. We're also looking for similar scores on achievement for giftedness when we talk about in the classroom. Now, we expand on this more because I feel like this is multi-dimensional by also including those the creativity and the talents. And so we think about talents, high achieving students in music, visual arts, drama, and athletics, right? So students that are very talented in all of these other domains. And we put these together because these are the students we need to nurture in that way. And creativity is that idea of bringing these new ideas to the table. And thinking outside of the box, that thing that seems like you can't do, being able to creatively process and create something new from nothing. Actually, Ithra mentioned this, but she told me this wonderful story that I thought embraced these differences and the importance of capitalizing on the differences between giftedness and creativity. Ithra, can you share that story?
Sure. Yeah, we have a story. We have a story pretty close to home, actually. When I was in States up until 2007, 2008-ish, usually the standard for programs, for different programs, were to go with either aptitude test or IQ test. We will talk about this a little bit more when we start talking about identification. And there are some performance-based tests for talent, obviously. However, during that time, the world was not really thinking about, researching about, or talking about creativity. Yes, there was some talks, but there wasn't a particular track when you want to enroll your child to a program that talks about gifted and talented and creative. So it would usually be either an aptitude test. They would look at your school's test results or standardized achievement test results, or they would just look at your IQ tests and is it 100, is it 150, is it 180? That's what they would practically look like. So a couple of years back, when we were in Boston, actually, I wanted to enroll my son to one of these summer programs that was particularly for gifted and talented children. So when I looked at their application criteria, I was very pleasantly surprised that they now actually have a track called for creativity. So they're asking their parents if they're applying to the program from the giftedness track or from the creativity track. So the giftedness track would include gifted and talented, and the creativity is a track on its own. And identification methods for both are very different. The creativity track, I actually realized that they're asking very detailed questions about the child, and the only way to those questions can be answered are if the teacher is really working with that child one-on-one and know the strengths of the child in that area. So I applied for this, and they required 3 forms to be filled by 3 different teachers that works with him, and these teachers gave these forms, and I sent it, and my son was accepted for the program, which was very nice. So when we went there, the first day, it was very interesting to see all sorts of children, over 100 of them, collected in one area, waiting to be admitted, divided by small groups, and their teachers come and collect them. This was going to be a 4-week program. So it was interesting to observe these children because you could actually tell which one of these kids are verbally gifted and talented, which ones are perhaps intellectually gifted and talented. Those are in the math and science track. You would see them a little bit introvert, not socializing with others, collecting themselves to a corner, whereas the socially gifted children, they do not know each other at all. This is the first time they see each other. And then you would look at them and you would think, oh my God, they must have known each other for over a year or something like that. So long story short, the funny thing about all of the story is that at the end, the last day, at the end of the month, my son's teacher tells the kids that one of the classes they created a robot, and they installed a camera on the robot, and they made a short movie. And they used the green screen to make the short movie using that robot and camera. And the teacher said, I'm going to give this green sheet as a souvenir to the person who created the most creative video. And that happened to be my son. So we still have it as a souvenir. The reason I wanted to share this story is because if there was no such track, if they were solely going after a number, an IQ, or an aptitude test, my son, along with maybe tons and tons of other children, wouldn't be able to join to this program. What would happen if they didn't join? Well, at the very least, they wouldn't be able to reach their full potential through these programs and through these teachers, because these programs provide curricular activities as well as extracurricular activities. And it is extremely important for these children to be exposed to different type of activities and different type of programs, so that 1, they can figure out what their own interests are, 2, they can figure out what their capabilities, gifts, and talents lie, and 3, they can decide for themselves for the future what it is that they really enjoy the most, what it is that they want to become in the future. So thank you for asking me to share this story.
The story is a very good example of what happens when we take a step away from standardized testing and we try to look at creativity or talent from another angle. I guess you already touched on that, but so can you elaborate further on what giftedness looks like across the globe, different types and criteria, different methods of identification?
Sure. Well, there are different types of giftedness to start with. I'm not sure if many people are aware of this or not, but giftedness can be divided into 3 main groups: analytic giftedness, synthetic giftedness, and practical giftedness. And because there are different types, obviously there are different identification methods, and there are different programs or help or support that can be provided for these different individuals. What is analytic giftedness? Well, it involves being able to take a problem as a whole and take it into bits and pieces to understand the parts of the problem and how they're interrelated, what are the relationships between them, and what are the relationships between them and the rest of the world. And this type of analytic giftedness is usually what is measured with IQ tests or intelligence tests. Synthetic giftedness involves insight, intuition, creativity. This is where creativity comes into play, adaptness at coping with original situations, skills that are associated with usually high achievement. And this kind of giftedness usually we see in the arts and sciences. The last one is the practical giftedness, where you may not see much of really high achievement in academic world for the child, but then you would see that they can involve applying analytic and synthetic skills both together into finding solutions to everyday problems. And these kind of skills usually characterize people who have successful careers. And we can talk about Ali Baba, who was refused to be taken as a student to Harvard when he applied to Harvard. We can talk about many of the genius people who were kicked out of school, who were stated that they don't belong to school because they cannot learn. So these people have the practical kind of giftedness. When we talk about these 3 types of giftedness, in fact, there are different criteria, like 5 major criteria that we look into to say if there's any sort of giftedness involved with this person or not, regardless if we do an IQ test or not. The first one is excellence. Excellence in that they seek what they do, excellence in the work that they produce. The second one is the rarity. How rare is their solution, how rare the way that they think, how rare the way that they look into the situation. Demonstrability. So they might be able to process in their mind, but how well they can demonstrate to the rest of the world so that the rest of the world can actually benefit from this excellence and rarity. The fourth one is productivity. And the last one is value. So if a person is producing a thought, we would be judging this thought or a product by looking at these 5 things: how excellent, how rare, how demonstrable, how productive, and how valuable this is. And obviously, people can nominate for being tested if they're being gifted, if they're gifted or not. And the nomination can be done by either a teacher or a parent in the adulthood. And in terms of the kidhood, it can be done by the person themselves, or it can be done by a peer. Usually on this part of the world, we don't see this that often. However, this is a possibility that can happen. And what happens after you nominate these children? Well, obviously you can do IQ tests, academic achievement tests, aptitude tests, and evaluation of work performances, judging by the analytic, synthetic, and practical giftedness. But I think Dr. April, working with children and being able to identify them, can talk a little bit more about in detail, especially the IQ tests and the aptitude tests.
Before we jump there, so I couldn't help but think about this. You spoke about the 3 different types of giftedness, and So would you say that a creative person has synthetic giftedness?
It could very well be, yes. It could very well be. In fact, they can in fact have a performance-based or a practical giftedness too, because not everyone is created for academic work. You would see people who are technicians who build things with their hands. I'm not talking about engineers, but people who actually fix things, like electricians and technicians or car mechanics, who does not really have to study in school, but they can use their creativity in terms of either synthetic or in a practical area or domains of giftedness, where to find solution to particular problems. And how do we understand this? If you take your car to 10 different technicians or a mechanic, and if they don't know what's wrong with it, and if this person can figure it out, then you can talk about the creativity and the synthetic as well as the practical giftedness in there.
So we can say that giftedness, talent, and creativity can be the same thing. They can be used interchangeably or not.
Actually, yes, I understand why they can be considered same. They're very, very, very similar, to say the least. However, there are little differences between the three. So giftedness, as per the terminology, refers to cognitive or intellectual superiority, creativity and motivation all combined in one person to an extent where all of this combination sets the child or the person apart from the rest of the population. So this is what we say giftedness is. Talent ordinarily has been used as special ability, an aptitude or accomplishment. It can come with giftedness, it can come with high IQ, but it does not necessarily have to come with high IQ. Think of all the really, really talented soccer players, baseball players, athletics, or gymnasts, or musicians. Not every single one of them have 180 IQ. So talent can exist in a gifted person, but it does not necessarily have to be in a gifted person. It can definitely exist in a person who would perfectly fall into the average IQ bracket. When we talk about creativity, we talk about a particular ability, a specific ability to express original or novel and useful ideas, to sense and clarify creative and important relationships, and to ask questions that are previously unthought of, but very crucial, very creative, very different and essential. So I hope this kind of clarifies the difference between the three terminologies.
It does. Thank you. Dr. April, would you like to elaborate on that?
I think I wanted to pick up where Ezra left off when she was talking about identification and the way in which we identify students, particularly for the area of intellectual giftedness, because this is a significant part, I guess, especially in the Western world, that giftedness, the terminology typically includes a measure of IQ. So the difficulty with this, and one of the things that Ezra and I spoke about quite extensively, is the way IQ tests are used. A lot of times there can be some cultural and language bias within them, because IQ tests are sometimes simply translated to a different language, but still the content or some of the questions may have some cultural references that are not familiar with somebody else in different parts of the world. The example that we spoke about was in the US, where maybe cows are really familiar, and the Middle East where camels are a little more familiar, right? So there's some differences in what you may see or be exposed to that are referenced in cognitive ability tests. And so simply translating an IQ test and then giving it to someone in another language doesn't account for that. So we often see underrepresentation of students from different backgrounds, those that have English as a second language. Sometimes we see underrepresentation in giftedness identified through IQ tests because of some of the bias that are in cognitive ability tests. And this has a really, really long history that I won't get into, but the newer assessments that we use, or the newer IQ tests that we use, are a little bit better in that. Some of our nonverbal assessments or nonverbal IQ tests do a little better job of assessing someone's cognitive ability, but it doesn't capture everything because intellectual capacity is so complex, right? And Ezra spoke about this a little bit. Sometimes students are verbally gifted. This is only one aspect of someone's intellectual ability. Then you have someone's working memory, you have how quickly they're able to process information, their understanding of nonverbal information, what they see. So focusing on just a full-scale IQ doesn't really represent someone's complete intellectual capacity a lot of times. And so we do see some underrepresentation through that identification process of simply using an IQ test. And this is where, as a psychologist and as teachers and educators, when we start to think about that nomination process and identify kids, it should be not simply that thinking ability, but also those academic skills and those that are gifted in other ways. So I think it's really important to consider lots of, those kinesthetically gifted kids, those creative kids, the artistic kids, in identifying students for gifted and talented types of programs. And we'll talk about gifted and talented programs, I think, here in a little bit, and what those might look like, or how to support students after they've been identified as gifted, or after they've been nominated for giftedness.
So now that we spoke about giftedness, what is it and how we can identify it? Dr. Ithra, what are some of the myths or misconceptions about giftedness?
There are actually quite a few misconceptions about what is giftedness, or what is a gifted child can or won't do, or is or not. There is a wide belief, unfortunately, where people think people who have special gifts or talents and who have very high IQ are in some sense of superhuman, because they can process 21 digits of pi after the comma in their minds. So normal people can't do that, hence they must be superhuman. Unfortunately, this is a myth, because just like everyone else, these individuals are irregular human with particular benefits to their gifts, as well as particular faults or disadvantages to their gifts, because every gift or most gifts come with disadvantages because of asynchronous development in gifted children. If we look at the 5 major developmental areas, we cannot say that every single developmental area is developed equally in every single gifted child, which is another myth. So they think that if you have a teacher, if you have a parent in front of you, and if you give them, you submit them and identify a gifted child with a relatively high IQ, and if that child has 30 to 40 kids inside the classroom, that teacher might think that, oh, this child is already gifted. I still have 29 students that I have to deal with. So the child can learn on his own, or she can deal with the problem on her own. So I have to focus and give my energy and time more with the rest of the students. Unfortunately, this belief is another myth, because they might be intellectually superior from the rest of their peers in that particular, say, emotional and social needs, and they might still need help with this subject or that subject. If a child is mathematically gifted, the child might still need help with all of the other subjects. So even with mathematics, the child would still need help, may still need help. In fact, the child might require more attention from the teacher than the rest of the students, because when they're left alone, they usually mentally withdrawn from the class because they're bored to death. If you look at the percentage of gifted dropouts, and if they look at the reasons of why they dropped out of school, they would tell you that because it's very boring. I'm very bored. I can already do all of these things. What's the point of going to school? And unfortunately, this is usually because of the systems, because of the programs, and because of the teachers' approach to these children. Another myth that says that we know 3 to 5% of any population, or most populations around the world, have special gifts or talents. Where this might be correct in terms of literature, if you look at the national data on identified IQ among any school population, you would see that the range goes between 3 to 5. Still, this is not correct, because if you look at every single research study that's out there, you would see the range actually goes between 0.5 to 20. And the reason for this big difference between the percentages of prevalence across the world is actually depending on the definition. So for any study that you have to identify, you have to rely on a certain definition. So if your definition states that you would only accept the top 1% of the population as gifted and the rest 99 are not identified as gifted, then you would only have that 1% come out from your research study. If you look at the population and if you say 2%, 3%, 5%, the top 5%, if you include talented individuals, if you include creative individuals, obviously this number changes, it becomes bigger. So it changes into a bigger percentage. Another myth is that gifted people can be mentally unstable. Well, this is not correct. They can be twice exceptional, yes, but not per se that if you're gifted, if you have a very high IQ, like Darwin, like Einstein, that has to come with some mental instability. That is absolutely a big myth, unfortunately. Another myth is that if the person has a high IQ, they have to score a very high mark on an IQ test, on an intelligence test, right? So if you go to a class full of children, say 30, and if you test all of them, and if there's anyone who has a high IQ, you are expecting that person to score a certain average, say 130 or 150 from that IQ test. That is another myth. Not every single high IQ child or an individual necessarily have to score high, as April just mentioned, because partly because identification tests can be translated from language to language, but there's still cultural biases and there's still adaptability problems. So as April said, if you are giving a test to a child in India, and if there's a cow picture on the test, and if you're asking the child to recognize what animal that is, per se, if the child is a 6-year-old, this is, by the way, one of the IQ test questions, the child might be able to know what an IQ is in India. They're just everywhere, walking on the streets like cats and dogs. But if you come to Bahrain or Saudi Arabia, and if you're asking a 6-year-old who's never been to a zoo and or who's never seen them on the streets or on the TV, because usually in this part of the world you would see camel. Or if you're in Africa and if you're asking an African child, that child may know perhaps a zebra or a giraffe, but not a koala. A koala is in Australia. So because of the adaptability and just mode-to-mode translation, not every single IQ test actually can measure the IQ. And another reason is that the child might be unmotivated. The child might be very anxious. The child might be stressed about being labeled. The child might be stressed about feeling anxious not to fit in, to be called as Mustafa or labeled as a geek or a nerd. For any one of these reasons, the child might be sick that day. Because of the anxiety, he might have terrible headache or he might have terrible stomachache. So the test result might not come as gifted, although the child is really gifted. So this is another myth that we need to talk about. And one last thing I will say is that students who have a true gift or talent for something, whatever that something is or domain or area is, will excel without special education. Some children with special gifts or talents may perform remarkably well or high level without special education of any kind, but some others will not. They will still be needing one-on-one, face-to-face, and particular strategies or particular tools that they require for their particular needs. As I said, certain gifts come with certain deficits at times. And another one is people who have special gifts do everything well, which is very related to this one, actually. Some people who are characterized as having a special gift have superior abilities, yes, of many kinds. Others have clearly superior talents in only one area. So we cannot just say that, yes, this person is gifted and this person is talented. Oh, he's extremely creative. And so that means that child is expected to do everything so well. Well, for instance, in the example where I gave at the beginning of our talk about my son, who was very creative, he was tested when he was before the age of 6, and he was found to have a perfectly normal average IQ. His IQ is within the average, just like majority of the society. But when he was tested for creativity before the age of 6, he was found to be at the age of 9. So, as I said, this is a myth. So talent and creativity can be found in highly intellectual individuals, as well as just individuals who are like the rest of the population, who are absolutely normal with a normal IQ range. Depending on the combination that comes within the child, where it's a gift, where it's a talent, where it's a creativity, how much of that, each of these particular domains that the child have, to what extent, is actually how we should perceive that child and how we should decide. I guess I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't have a sweeping generalization on gifted and talented individuals. We just study them case by case and look at their strengths as well as their weaknesses, because they do have weaknesses in most cases. And we need to approach them with programs, with education programs, whether they're in school or whether they're out of school, extracurricular activities as per parents or mentors, to fit the needs of that particular child. It could be social, it could be emotional, it could be academic, it could be extracurricular. So we just have to look at that case by case. And I guess perhaps April can add to this. I'm not sure, but
well, yeah, I mean, you brought up some excellent points of those myths and misconceptions around gifted students. And a couple of things that I just wanted to state was, you mentioned a couple of different areas: twice exceptional students and asynchronous development. And I think this is really important, because these are the students that we sometimes miss in identifying giftedness. So I've worked with students that have dyslexia but are gifted, that they have ADHD but they're gifted, autism, they fall on the autism spectrum and they're gifted, you know. And sometimes we mask giftedness in other ways because of other learning difficulties. And so I think it's really important to not dismiss that and just focus on that one area. Students that struggle to focus and attend could very well be our highest achieving students, our intellectually gifted students, and but sometimes it goes unnoticed or it's masked. And one of the ways that it's masked is what you call asynchronous development, which is uneven development. So you may be chronologically the age of 5. You may be reading at a really high level, like a 3rd grade level, but your social emotional skills are not at that same level. And so you're crying and misbehaving, but you can read at a really high level, and your misbehavior and your crying and your emotional dysregulation masks these gifts. So I think these myths and misconceptions are so important to understand because of sometimes under identifying those true gifts that students may have. So thanks for bringing those up.
Sure, those are really good examples, actually.
Thank you. So I feel like we're already touching a bit on underachievement and how it correlates with giftedness. So if we can jump to that, that would be great. April?
Yes. Yeah, I guess I kind of mentioned a little bit of underachievement, but sometimes, and Ithra did a really nice job of mentioning this as well, where students are very intellectually gifted, but they may be bored in the classroom. And so sometimes they don't achieve to their highest potential. We'll see at times an increase in dropout rates, anxiety, depression, having difficulties because their gifts and talents aren't being supported in the best way. So I think that it's really important, again, that we put supports in place for the students, for gifted students, because without that, they struggle to be successful in schools. And then also we're not maximizing their potential for society and later in life, right? What would happen if Einstein's giftedness wasn't nurtured, you know? And this is where, as parents and educators, school systems, that giftedness is so important. And I think oftentimes we don't, because we assume that because you're gifted, you're just going to be successful. You can do it on your own. And that's not always the case. We have ways to support students in school systems, whether that's acceleration, great, by like a full grade, maybe a grade skipping. It might be what we call curriculum compacting, like getting through the content or the expectations for a grade level quicker. It might be just content acceleration. There's lots of putting projects in place. There's lots of different ways that we can support gifted learners, and by capitalizing on their strengths. But it's so important that we nurture those as parents, that we listen to our students and we nurture those interests and really hear them. If they're telling you, I'm bored in school, maybe there's a reason for that.
When looking at underachievement as a consequence of what we just talked about, of not being able to recognize giftedness, of allowing our kids to be bored at school without addressing it as a serious issue. Dr. Ithra, how do we manage to know what's their area of interest versus their area of giftedness? How do we help them thrive instead of just survive?
Well, 3 key words, I would say, in a summary: flexibility, adaptability, and accommodation. In many cases, if children are not exposed to several areas of developmental domains or educational areas, it would be difficult to figure out what their particular talents lay upon and what their particular interests are. For instance, if you don't have a mountain full of snow, and if you've never skied in your life, you would never know if you're going to be the next Olympic champion in skiing or not. If you've never skied, you would never know if you have talent in that area or not. Therefore, putting exposure into children is very, very, very important. So we always suggest that the program that they go to should be flexible enough to accommodate their particular needs, and they should be exposed into different areas of curricula and extracurricular activities. Not all the times where gifted children have certain gifts and talents, but then their interests are within that domain. A child would be very gifted in science and mathematics. In fact, there's a child who is in elementary school who is solving problems at the college with a university professor, mathematical problems. So this doesn't really mean that the child will automatically end up in the mathematics profession, or a profession that requires mathematics. The child might be interested in making music, or the child might be interested in becoming a lawyer. So this is where flexibility comes into play. Yes, we do need to expose them as many areas as possible. Yes, they do need to try different things, learn different things, see where their talents are. while they see where their talents are, and through practice, they would figure it out on their own, if it is what they love to do until the rest of their days, or they are enjoying doing something else much more. So this is what, as parents and as educators, I guess we can do for them. That will be the best for them.
Thank you. April, would you like to add anything else on that, or maybe talk more about why we should capitalize on giftedness, even though it is such a small prevalence? I guess we already talked about that. And we touched on how a child can be talented in one area while interested in another area. So why should we capitalize on that?
I mean, I think ultimately is to nurture the gifts of every child, or those child that have those gifts and talents, because without that, they're not meeting their full potential, and can result in underachievement, dropouts. It can result in a real dislike for education, and we, as a society, we should be nurturing those gifts and talents. As I said, where would we be without a lot of the gifted individuals that we've seen throughout history? So I think as educators, as parents, as school administrators, whoever's out there listening right now, it's that this is an important population for us to ensure that their needs are being met.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about, what do the families of highly successful people have in common?
I'm glad you asked. Actually, I really wanted all the parents to hear this out. You do not have to have a gifted child, a talented child, or a very creative child to be able to provide the things that the families of highly successful gifted children provided for them to make sure that they reach to their full potential. But this is something that can be done by every single parent for every single child. But if you look at the literature, if you look at the research studies where hundreds, if not thousands, of gifted individuals were studied, and they looked into the common traits of their parents, what kind of parents they had, so how comes their talents and gifts were developed and they were not lost or dropped out? Why did they not only survive, but how comes they thrive and they become leaders in their communities, societies? So they looked at the common traits of these parents, and they found really interesting things. Very simple, very straightforward, but perhaps not existing everywhere. So they found that there's at least someone in the family, but in most cases, both parents had personal interests in the child's talent. They were actually interested in whatever the child's talent area. They didn't say, oh, no, but you have to be an engineer, or but you have to be a doctor, you have to be a teacher, whatever. Wherever the talent was, the parents took real interest in that talent, and they did everything in their power to support its development, whatever that talent is, in whichever area that talent is. They were role models. They were not only preaching their child for best character, best way of studying, best way of doing this and that, but they actually become the role models of whatever it's that they were preaching, especially in terms of lifestyle, the way that they lived, they practiced in their own lives, whatever they wanted to teach their child. It wasn't just verbal. There was specific parental encouragement of the child to explore, to participate in home activities. They actually did spend time doing activities inside their homes related to the areas of their developing talent, and to join in the family in related activities. So they joined the rest of the family into these activities. It became a social event for them. Small signs of interests and small signs of capability that the talented child showed, they were rewarded. So the parents rewarded these children verbally and otherwise. Parents took it granted, this is very important, that their children would learn. They didn't think otherwise. They thought they would learn. End of story. Because they said they would learn, if they tried this way, this method, this resource, this teacher, this school. And if the child failed, they didn't stop there, because they took it at the face value. This child will learn. Because they took it as granted, this child will learn. When the child didn't learn with this method, they tried another one. They tried another one. They tried another one until they found out what is right for their child. This is what those parents did for these children. They never gave up, because they took it granted that their child would learn in the area of talent, just as they would learn language. Every single child is born, and every single child learns their mother tongue. There's no child who wouldn't speak their mom's language, their dad's language. Just like that, they took that into account. The family exhibited expected behaviors. They put standards, they put values related to the talent, and holding to clear schedules and standards for their performances appropriate for the child's stage of development and appropriate for their age. The teaching that happened was informal. I guess this is important, and occurred in variety of settings, not just in classroom, not just inside the house, but they took opportunity of every single setting, every single environment, whether it's a park, whether it's a museum, whether it's summer vacation, whether it's school, whether it's home. They took this as an opportunity for teaching something, for learning something. And they did more exploratory learning, much like play, because children learn best through play, not sitting 6 or 8 hours in a chair in front of a teacher where they're not allowed to move. Then they are labeled ADHD, this child is moving a lot. Well, they have energy that they need to spend, right? So this is what those parents did. The family worked with a tutor or a mentor, and they received information from these tutors and mentors specifically to learn how to guide their own child's specific ability. So you see, you can kind of start to get the pattern of what these parents were doing, how much they were invested and how much they were interested in the child's talent, the area of talent. Parents observed, but not only observed, but practiced and insisted their children put the required amount of time for their practice within their area of talent. Say if your child is talented in music and he's playing piano or he's playing guitar, right? No matter how talented you are, no matter how gifted you are, without appropriate practice, you wouldn't become someone. You wouldn't reach to your full potential. So these parents made sure that if it is half an hour you need to practice on a daily basis, that child did half an hour on a daily basis. If the child was talented in mathematics, the child did play chess, the child did do mathematical activities, playing kind of mathematical activities every single day, and their required time. So the parents were actually playing the role of the teacher at home in most instances. They sought special instruction. So this was one of the myths that we talked about, but they did seek special instruction and special instructors for their children, so that their children can, their needs can be met as appropriately as possible to their particular needs and to their particular pace of development and to their particular interest areas. And the last thing they actually did is that the parents encouraged participation in events. See how important this is. If there were recitals in school, if there were concerts in the community, if there were contests, any event that happened in the community or in the school, nationally, domestically, internationally, it didn't matter, in which the child's capabilities were displayed in public. So they made sure those capabilities were tested and displayed in public. And all of these things actually made a big difference for those children who had the gift, who had the talent, but they were not wasted, they were not lost because of those parents, and they were able to become very successful individuals and leaders of their communities.
Okay, thank you, Ithra. I guess you already touched on the role that society, whether it's schools, parents, or educators, or even cultural centers, can do to meet the needs of gifted, talented, or creative children. we have 2 minutes left. The discussion is very interesting. So April, if you have anything to say before we move to the closing remarks.
I think the only thing I would just end with is, as parents and educators, and Ithra hit this so well, but just listen, advocate, support, love, and just spend time doing those things that your children love, and you can't go wrong there.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting discussion. I wish we had more time. I know there's a lot more to discuss within this topic. Unfortunately,
I just want to make one closing remark, because I see this from many parents, many individuals. My child does this, my child doesn't do this. They don't speak at this age, or they do this, they don't do that. They compare between the other children, and they ask, is this normal? Is this abnormal? I just want to say to those parents and to every single individual out there who is wondering about the same thing, let us not look into the situation and the children in terms of, is this normal within their age? Is this not normal? Are they ahead? Are they behind? But let us only remember, every child writes their own book. There is no normal, there is no abnormal. Every single child writes their own book. We just have to be there to help them write the best book that they can possibly write.
Thank you. That was wonderful. This has been a very interesting discussion. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. I think we spoke enough about how we should maybe shy away from standardized testing when wanting to understand our children. It's been a pleasure having you both here today in Coffee with the Learning Leaders, and I hope we have future discussions and we can go more in depth about these topics. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
محافظين. من يوم ما توحدت أرضنا وأبوابنا مفتوحة لكل البشر، محافظين على التراث والكنوز، وعلى الكلمة وحروفنا المتناغمة في كل سطر، وعلى النقوش اللي لقينا فيها طيب الأثر، وعلى الفن اللي تخطى الحدود وقرب بين الشعوب. محافظين على ريحة القهوة والهيل، وأرحب تراحيب المطر، وعلى المحبة اللي طالت كل البشر، والعطاء اللي امتد مثل ظل الشجر. محافظين وبسواعدنا نتحدى الصخر، نحفر طريقنا مجد وكرامة وعز وفخر. ما تغيرنا جيل ورا جيل، حب الوطن فينا فاض ونهم، وتحت كل سماء وفوق كل أرض محافظين.